you break down what you mean by dismantling the bureaucracy?
Yeah.
Because it sounds good.
Yeah. Within politics.
So it's like if you have like an 8-headed hydra and you cut off one of the heads, it grows right back. That's the model of incremental reform. That's, Ron DeSantis when he says, I want to fire Christopher Wray at the FBI. That's the way I view it, is cosmetic change.
What you're saying is like Christopher Wray is one guy.
Christopher Wray is like literally one dude.
There's 10 other guys that are going to keep
There's
on doing the exact
35,000
same
other
thing.
guys. 35,000 other guys.
As usual.
So I mean shut down the FBI. So the institution known as the Federal Bureau of Investigation, what I call the failed Bureau of Investigation, because I think it has failed to even carry out its basic law enforcement functions on issues ranging from child trafficking to the fentanyl epidemic. Actually, the right answer is to shut it down. So there's always the risk when you're taking...
What?
Well, I'll tell you what the mechanics look like, but there's always the risk. You're going to take some risk. One risk is you don't cut enough fat. The other is that you cut so much that you also cut some muscle. You can't say, no, I'm going to cut all of it and just the precise amount, because if you're bringing a chainsaw, that's not a plan.
Yeah.
Where I'm different than most people is I am willing to take the risk of cutting so much that we cut some muscle, but I believe the right approach will then to be regrow in a precise manner that which you overcut, rather than to take the risk of not cutting enough, which I think is an illusion. In some ways, the worst of all worlds, which gives the people the sense that something happened without actually anything of meaningful
But isn't that
change
our
happening.
risk?
What's that?
That's our risk.
That's the one. That's what's happening right now.
What I'm saying is that's not your risk. It's the people's risk.
But that's what I mean. I'm saying us as the people, right? Us as the people.
You said I'm the politician willing to take the risk. I'm like, yo, you're taking a risk on my behalf. You have security.
Exactly. Okay.
I guess that's rooted in the theory that he doesn't think they're acting for the people.
Yeah, they're not. I'm just reviewing myself. I'm volunteering to represent us.
What's so bad with the FBI?
So I think the FBI has been rotten since its inception.
Yeah.
And it was the embodiment of the managerial class. So J. Edgar Hoover built himself and his institution to be effectively insulated from any form of public accountability. I don't know if you guys, here's a book I would actually really recommend. My wife has read it.
About anything.
So there's a book called G-Man. I would read it.
Okay.
It's not some right-wing screed, I promise. It's like a Yale historian, for all I know is a lefty, for all I know is, talks about the history of the J. Edgar Hoover
Can I just
building.
define one thing for everybody listening or watching right now? We're going to use the term managerial class for the rest of the podcast. This is essentially the middleman between what the people want and the politicians that are serving them, or the workers of a company and the upper
I would call
it,
yeah, exactly. That sounds good. That sounds good.
Owner,
the principals,
the,
yep.
and the principals or the owners of the company.
The owner.
So there's this system.
It's the committee class.
The committee class, the managerial class, whatever it is. But these people aren't necessarily working for the company. There might not, in BlackRock they are, but they're not working for the government necessarily. It's a
separate breed of middle management bureaucrats. It's like the equivalent of who sits in between the student and the tenured professor at the university is the dean of.
In politics, how does this present itself? Is it politicians?
Three-letter agencies. The three-letter agencies.
Got it.
That's what we're talking about. FBI, SEC, ATF, CDC, Department of Education, TSA,
DEA.
What about
DEA?
What about companies? What about Boeing or?
It gets. So the way I view companies is they view these unaccountable nodes as their vehicles for capture.
And the node is the politician.
The agency. So that's where power gets concentrated. It's in an unaccountable place, then it's just about capturing it.
So you are talking about actually cutting people at these agencies.
I'm talking about
shutting the whole agency.
Shutting the whole agency down.
Because the idea
similar to like how people said defund the police. They complained of how the police system has been running all this time. So now they're like,
I think this is a legitimate. So my view is on the FBI, on the FBI's case, there's 35,000 employees at the FBI. And by the way, there's the same FBI that 60 years ago was incorrectly collecting tapes of Martin Luther King and threatening him to commit suicide over his affronts or whatever. That today is going after.
He saw the tattoo. He's been collecting information this whole time.
I like the tattoo. It made an impression. That today is actually now going after, I believe, political opponents who have a political persuasion that the benevolent dictators inside the three-letter agency have decided need to be quashed, just like they decided he needed to be quashed. So it's not a partisan point I'm making, but
there's
35,000 employees at the FBI. 20,000 of them are the back office bureaucrats that are the classic, typical managerial class. So when I say shut down the FBI, those 20,000 are going home. and finding honest work, whatever it is. And by the way, we happen to live in a moment where most businesses have more job openings than there are people looking for work in this country. So maybe we can kill two birds with one stone. But either way, they're going home. The 15,000 cops on the front lines, investigative agents, we will move them to, say, the U.S. Marshals, which, I mean, everything I'm naming, they each have their own problems, but they're not, as an institution, has not suffered the same level of rot that the FBI has.
It's not systemic.
Yeah, and the U.S. Marshals has been far more effective than the FBI in going after child sex trafficking rings. And, you can even talk about the DEA has a lot of its faults, but sooner I would move them to the DEA than keep them at the FBI to go after the fentanyl epidemic. There's a financial crimes enforcement network at the U.S. Treasury to go after the future SBFs or the FTXs or the financial fraudsters of the world. The remaining 15,000, move them. So that's what shutting down the FBI looks like.
How do you decide who's who? How do you decide 15,000 good, 20,000 bad?
Well, the 15,000 are investigative agents that are not sort of...
Yeah, if your job
based on
is like
position.
police officer.
Okay.
They're like
My
the
bad.
equivalent of the cops, actually. So we'll use that frontline talent, but deputized by at least a bureaucracy that has not been corrupted in the same way that the current FBI has. And the current FBI makes it pretty nakedly transparent. It's still, for God's sake, the J. Edgar Hoover building. It's the name of the building. They're celebrating the guy's legacy today. So I would say shut it down. And I'm different than every other Republican in that regard, but I think that that's actually the correct answer.
But this is why we need context for these conversations. Saying shut down the FBI is such a volatile headline that when I see that and I'm like, what a ridiculous
Crazy talk.
notion. What is he saying? Is
Crazy
he just
talk.
trying to trump up some fucking...
So you know who's good at this?
But real
my
quick-
wife is the best one because she's not a politicized person. She's a brilliant person. She initially thought this was crazy talk. She's actually the one who found G-Man. She's just like, all right, I know my husband. He's saying some stuff that people say is sounding crazy, but let me just form my own opinion. And so she's actually the one that clued me into G-Man, which is, I don't think anybody who reads that book will come out believing anything other than, not only they're going to think what I'm going to say is crazy. They think you will agree with me that the status quo is what's crazy.
It's crazy.
And it's crazy that we ever allowed for the creation of an institution like this
But
that was this insulated from accountability.
Your umbrella is not shut down the FBI. Your umbrella is shut down any actor, agency, single person that interrupts what the people want and how that is executed.
Exactly. And here's the thing, I can't take credit for that.
But real quick, just
because our founding fathers said it in motion.
the same thing.
So what I'm saying is there's 3 branches of government in the United States.
But real quick, so we don't move
4.
on because I don't want people to miss this because I think it's an important point. You thought the FBI was being used to, I guess, remove certain potential nominees or to tarnish their image, to interfere with election processes. Is that fair?
Among other things.
But
not just election
giving one
processes.
example so people can digest. So
I think the FBI, I believe.
Yeah.
I believe the FBI played a role. I'm saying that decides we don't have all the facts, but based on what we know,
talking about Biden,
I believe.
Biden laptop.
I believe the FBI even played a role in instigating January 6th.
Okay, so perfect example. We can talk about both of those things, but just so people don't miss, just so people don't miss both, and I want to get back to that, but just so people don't miss the point. The point is, if the FBI itself or is being used to interrupt what the people want, and in this situation, it is a nominee. And if they're tarnishing the image of that nominee, now the people don't get the elected official that they actually desire.
Yeah,
and
based on false pretenses.
Exactly. And then that
best.
is the problem with the managerial class. In the same way it's a problem with BlackRock, with your investments.
That is one of many problems.
And I think this is another.
I think that is a very digestible way of going. So it's not even the FBI is the problem. It's not the letters. It's the fact that this organization has been used as a weapon to remove the freedom of the people to elect a person that they feel represents them.
Yes, exactly.
With impunity.
And if those elected representatives pass bad laws, well, that's your fault. As Thomas Jefferson says,
that's your accountability.
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson's great quote. I'm going to botch it, but basically he says, the people deserve the government they vote for. And I think that by
the
definition,
government
that's
sucks.
true.
You voted for it. And listen,
and he's the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence,
and
by
the
the
deep
way.
state is essentially just the managerial
Disintermediating
CIA
that,
who can act without the president knowing, without people that get...
And the deep state, and it's not in a critical sense. I'm just offering a descriptive sense. The deep state effectively says, yes, the people are going to get the government they vote for, and it's going to suck because people are idiots. And
Yeah.
they cannot be trusted.
The condescension.
And it's bad for them.
Yeah.
And so we need to make sure that people don't get the government they vote for, because that's going to be a pretty shitty government. And they better get actually one that actually allows them to have what's better for them, even though they don't know it.
Let's use managerial class instead
Yeah.
of deep state. Just so
Yeah,
I just want, because this is like,
The managerial class.
it's, I think, a really important point that I think would resonate with people, because the average person, I feel like right now, is so disillusioned with government. And I think that's why you see like people going, well, how is Biden president? How is there nobody else that's out there? What the hell is going on? And I think that's why Bernie, and I think that's why Trump were these two figures that got so much support, because they were both seen as outsiders to the system.
Right.
So people are disillusioned with the
system.
And the system is the fucking managerial class
Yes.
that makes me feel like the people that I am voting for do not represent my actual interests.
That's right.
Or
And so that
limits-
feeling is grounded in
Yeah.
truth.
And
it's not just
yeah.
a feeling.
And it
is
limits
an
the
accurate
options.
perception of what is true.
Like what
Yeah.
you said right there with the FBI. If the FBI is limiting my options of people to vote for, and I'm just voting for the lesser of two evils, which I think both sides end up kind of doing. You're voting for, in your brain, the lesser of two evils. You have limited my option to vote for the person that I truly want to represent me. So that is so if the FBI or if any other three-letter agency or anything else is restricting my representation, I agree. We should have some way of taking a jackhammer to that system. I don't know what it is. But to me, that is a way more digestible.
Yes.
Yeah. Does that make sense? Or did you guys know initially when he said
My
that?
question is, do we need some version of a managerial class? Are you here to abolish it or recreate it?
okay, this is good.
I think that we go through these cycles in history, right? But I think that we live in one of the moments where the only way you're gonna slay the Leviathan, and I use that term, the Leviathan's Thomas Hobbes. I mean, this is what the stuff I'm describing, by the way, is like, these are not original observations. This has been a struggle for most of human history.
Yeah.
But it's what Thomas Hobbes called the Leviathan is what we're calling the machine or the managerial class. We live in a moment right now where it is I believe, it is impossible to incrementally pick around the edges of it. I think right now the only available effective option is to take the risk, and probably there's gonna be some cost involved. Probably there's gonna be some negatives that come out of it. I'll be the first to acknowledge that. But on net, undoubtedly the right thing to do is nonetheless to come in and break the hell out of the glass and acknowledge there's going to be some inconvenience that may come from that at a frictional transitional cost. But absent our willingness to do that, it just isn't otherwise going to happen.
Will there be
And
a
it needs to
recreation?
happen. And so
think naturally it will-
that's up to the people who come next.
It's going to happen again.
That's up to
and
the
then we
people.
got to break it again.
And exactly. And so that becomes that iterative cycle, but hopefully it never gets to the place where the scale of the wreckage needs to be what it is now. But the question is, that's up to every one of us makes our own unique contribution and imprint. This is the imprint that the next successful leader of our country, I think, needs to make.
Okay.
And then it's up to the guy who comes after and to the people who come after and what we decide and iteratively how we respond to that. Because then inevitably there's going to be some calamity. It's going to be how did we allow that to happen?
Yeah.
And then we're going to accept a trade-off that's in the other direction of that calamity.
Yeah.
Aren't we smart enough to have prevented this? Well, it was really self-governance that got us there. So this becomes, this is the human experience, right?
Yeah.
This is iteratively the struggle that human history is all about.
Power consolidates.
But this is right now where we are, in my belief.
Yeah.
It sounds good. It's just hard to run on that because think about the 20,000 people and their families that are let go of just that one agency, and then the 30,000 here and the 50,000.
I've had people in the rooms with me being like, my uncle or my son is working in this agency, and I answer them honestly, which is that I don't think, and it sounds like a crude thing to say, but it's the truth. I don't think that the job of the federal government is or should be to provide employment opportunity. I just don't. I think the job of the federal government is to represent the interests of the people. Now, it turns out, by God, one of the main things limiting our economic growth right now is literally, if you're a small business or even a large business, the number one thing that's stopping you from expanding right now is literally finding people to staff your open positions. So that's the country we live in right now. And one in which we have the massive problem that we do, not to mention the cost of this. It's not cost-free from a taxpayer perspective when we're $34 trillion in the hole as a nation as well in national debt. to say that I have sympathy for many of the individuals involved, because as I said, it's not one of these is like a culprit and an evil person. But the right thing to do for the nation is for public service to be about public service and not about guarantor of employment opportunity. And that we need to live in a thriving country in which those people find employment opportunity elsewhere in an economy that right now happens to be hungering for more people to fill open roles of employment. And so you're right. You're having a political point. That may not win you friends amongst those voters. And that's true. I've also had many people who have come up and said, I've worked in these bureaucracies, and I understand that I would lose my job. But you're right. I've seen it. And I agree with you, which is also heartening as well. I'm not saying that's everybody, but I think that that's, for people who have been on the inside, what I'm saying is not that foreign to process. And anyway, the piece about shutting it down is, like, I think if you do it in an orderly way, right? So I want to lay off 75% of the federal bureaucracy over the course of the first term. So we'd stage it over 4 years. We're not doing all of that on day one. The first 4 agencies I had said I would shut down would be FBI, ATF, CDC, and U.S. Department of Education. We've got, if I may say so myself, I would like to think, relatively orderly plans for carrying this out.
Please explain Department of Education, because that's another one that I heard your take, and it was really smart, but I think to people it's like, what the fuck are you talking about?
It's just so jarring.
Yes.
And I'm sure for you, because you've probably read so much about this, you've thought so much about this, you've been in the think tank meetings with your people where you're like, how can we execute this incredibly difficult task? It probably seems like an absolute no-brainer, right? And one of the tricky things about being a politician, which I'm sure you've learned, which is different than being a CEO, is when it comes to a CEO and I'm subscribing to you, I'm going, I want to work for this guy, I believe in this guy, I don't even need you to convince me. I trust that you know what we're going to do, and maybe I'll go, hey, I think this is a good way to do it, and then I could influence your opinion. But when it comes to being a politician, you're going to make this change, and you need to convince me that this change is in my best interest.
Right.
And when I just hear shut down the...
It's because you're the boss, actually. That's what it is.
Exactly.
People lose that sense. And one of the beauties of this Iowa caucus process, I did more events than all the other candidates combined.
Yeah.
Which is, I realized actually through the process what this was actually about. If this process of like Iowa going first through this caucus system is about something, it's actually about instilling humility into the candidates.
Yeah.
That's really what it's about. Is you otherwise forget who the boss is.
Yeah.
Right? And so like I got some 27-year-old kid comes to one of my events. He's like, give me your accountabilities. What are you going to do? By 12 months, like, how will I know you accomplished what I told you to accomplish?
Love it.
And it landed with me because that sounds like a question I was asking back when I was a CEO hiring people. But if you're a presidential candidate, you got to remember, this is a job interview.
Hell yeah.
So I was like, this kid gets it. Like, I'm really into that.
Also, guys, don't forget about Prize Picks. Hurry up and sign up. NFL playoffs is the best time of the year. This is what you got to do. I'm giving you my Sing locks. First of all, this is a 4-player thing. So it's a 4-player pick. So if you hit, you can make some cash off of Prize Picks. First of all, Isaiah Pacheco will get more than 63.5 rushing yards. Patrick Mahomes will get more than 248.5 passing yards. Travis Kelce, I love you. I love what you're doing with Taylor Swift, but I think you're going to get than 65 receiving yards. And Lamar Jackson, MVP, I think you're going to get more than 212 passing yards. And sign up for prizepicks.com. Use that promo code Schulz. They will match your initial deposit up to $100. So you put in $100, you get $100 for free.